My dad demanded I attend my stepbrother's promotion party after calling me unfocused. They called me a freeloading artist until the CEO asked me for a private commission. I'm 28, an artist, and my family doesn't get it. My dad's always called me unfocused, and my stepbrother Andrew, who's a corporate finance guy, has always been the golden child. They've been pressuring me to get my act together while I've been trying to make my career as a painter. Anyway, my dad forced me to attend Andrew's promotion party, and after a lot of tension, it turns out I met Peter, the CEO of Andrew's company, who asked me for a private art commission. Things didn't go as planned, and now I'm questioning a lot about family dynamics, validation, and what it really means to be successful. I didn't want to go to Andrew's promotion party. I really didn't. But that didn't matter. It was either show up or face my father's wrath. Benjamin, my dad, had a way of making sure his voice was the only one that mattered when it came to family decisions. And right then, his voice was sharp. "You're coming, Claire," he said, looking at me over the dinner table, a stern frown carved across his face. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and I could tell the conversation was going nowhere. He didn't even need to explain why. It was simple. Andrew, my stepbrother, was the kind of guy Benjamin could brag about. A senior analyst in some high-paying finance job, all set to climb the corporate ladder. I, on the other hand, was unfocused, his favorite word for me, because I spent my time trying to make a living out of something as impractical as art. "You need to stop with this artist thing and be realistic," he continued, his voice cool, casual, like it was just another reminder of how I wasn't living up to his expectations. "Andrew's making real progress. I expect you to show up and support him. Don't embarrass the family." "Sure, Dad," I said, trying to mask the resentment bubbling up inside me. I wasn't even going to argue anymore. It wasn't worth it. I glanced at Diane, my stepmother, who smiled at me in that sickly sweet way she always did. "It's a big moment for Andrew, honey. You don't want to miss it, do you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. It would be pointless. Andrew and I had never been close, despite the fact that we'd been raised in the same house for years. He was everything my dad wanted me to be: ambitious, driven, financially successful. I, on the other hand, was, well, just trying to survive as an artist, selling a painting here and there, struggling to find my place in the world. The next evening, I found myself in a sleek, expensive venue in downtown, wearing a dress that was years out of fashion but still fit me. Andrew's promotion party was held at a place that was far too fancy for my taste: glittering chandeliers, champagne flutes clinking, people laughing and discussing stock options like it was the only thing that mattered. I felt out of place from the moment I stepped inside. I tried not to be noticed, but of course, it was impossible. I was the odd one out, the artist in a room full of people who didn't understand anything about painting, or why someone would choose that as a career. I glanced around the room, watching Andrew soak up the attention, shaking hands with colleagues, his back straight, his smile perfect. He looked like the man my dad had always hoped I would become. But as usual, he couldn't see the value in what I did. To him, I was just some dreamer who couldn't get her life together. I wandered to the side of the room, towards the snack table, trying to blend in and avoid anyone who might try to engage me in awkward conversation. But that's when I saw him, Peter. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't laughing loudly or boasting about his latest investment. He stood off to the side, watching the room with quiet observation. His presence felt different. He had the kind of charisma that didn't need to be loud. Tall, with sharp features, dark hair that looked like it had been styled effortlessly, and a tailored suit that looked far too expensive for anyone not at the top of the corporate food chain. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were piercing blue, intense, and I could feel him studying the crowd with a sort of quiet curiosity. As I picked up my hors d'oeuvres, Peter approached me, and I instantly felt the weight of his gaze. "Claire?" His voice was calm, confident, but without any arrogance. "Yes?" I answered, surprised that he even knew my name. "I'm Peter," he said, smiling politely, "Andrew's boss." I blinked. Oh. Hi. I didn't realize you were here, I said, trying to keep the awkwardness at bay. It's good to meet you. He chuckled. It's nice to meet you, too. I've heard a lot about you. The words "a lot" hung in the air. Was Andrew talking about me? About how I was a failure? About how I was a disappointment? But I didn't ask. Instead, I simply nodded, trying to hide the discomfort rising in me. You're an artist, right? Peter asked, surprising me. Yes, I paint, I said, cautious now. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but he didn't seem to be judging me, at least not the way I expected. Peter smiled, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. That's fascinating. I've always found art to be one of the most underappreciated things in the world. People get so caught up in numbers and profits that they forget the value of creating something meaningful. I felt my shoulders relax. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't dismissing me or looking at me with that pitying gaze I'd grown so accustomed to. You're the CEO of Andrew's company, right? I asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. I am, he replied with a modest nod. But that's just one part of my life. What about you, Claire? What kind of art do you do? We spent the next few minutes talking about my work, my struggles, and my hopes for the future. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone truly understood me. Peter didn't see me as a failed artist. He saw me as someone with a potential he wanted to invest in. The conversation was easy, not forced like the ones I often had with my dad or Andrew. You know, Peter said, his tone shifting slightly, I've been thinking about commissioning a piece of art for my office. Something unique, something that speaks to me. I blinked. Wait, you mean, you're asking me to paint something for you? He nodded, his expression serious now. Yes, if you're interested. I think it could be a really great collaboration. I wasn't sure what to say. A commission from Peter? The CEO? I hadn't even considered something like this. This wasn't just a casual compliment, he was genuinely offering me an opportunity. Before I could respond, Andrew appeared behind me, his voice dripping with that typical corporate confidence. Hey, Claire, I see you've met Peter. He's the one who made this whole thing happen. He had a smug smile on his face, like he was proud of his role in all of this. Peter turned to Andrew and gave him a polite nod, but I could sense the cool distance between them. There was no real camaraderie between them, just a professional transaction. Andrew didn't stay long. He was busy making the rounds, talking about the promotion, his new role, and the future of the company. But I was still standing there, processing what had just happened. Peter and I continued talking for a little while longer, exchanging business cards and discussing the details of the commission. The more I spoke to him, the more I realized this could be my chance, a chance to prove to myself that I could make it on my own terms, without needing to bow to my father's vision of success. As the night wore on, I excused myself from the party. The tension had lifted, replaced by something that felt like hope, but mixed with the kind of frustration only family could bring. I was walking away from the party with more than just a commission. I was walking away with the belief that I could finally succeed on my own terms. I left the party with my head buzzing, my heart racing, and 1,000 questions spinning in my mind. The whole situation felt surreal. How had I gone from being the unfocused artist to being approached by the CEO of Andrew's company for a commission? A private commission, no less. It was everything I had dreamed of, and yet, it was also everything I had never expected. But as I walked back to my car, the weight of what had just happened started to sink in. I had been away from home for so long, but I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how successful I got, I would always be the outsider in my family. Andrew would always be the real success story in my father's eyes, and I'd always be the one who couldn't quite figure it out. As I drove home, the conversation with my dad lingered in the back of my mind. I hadn't told him about Peter's offer yet. Part of me was afraid to. I knew how my father would react. He wouldn't see it as a victory for me. He'd see it as a fluke, as something that would never last. He would brush it off as a small favor from one of Andrew's colleagues and continue pushing me to give up my art and get a real job. I parked in front of my apartment, a modest space I had rented when I decided I could no longer stay in my childhood home. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was a place where I could think without my father's disapproving glare or Andrew's smug smirk. The next few days passed in a haze. I emailed Peter with some samples of my work, and he responded almost immediately, enthusiastic about the direction I was suggesting. It felt like a dream. But the excitement was tempered by something else, the looming, unavoidable conversation with my father. A week after the party, I found myself back at my dad's house for another Sunday dinner. It was the same routine, same table, same faces, the same awkward silences that only seemed to appear when I was around. Andrew was there, of course. He had just returned from a business trip, looking every bit the polished, successful professional. He was wearing one of those suits that cost more than my entire month's rent. I couldn't help but feel the familiar sense of inadequacy creep in when I saw him. We sat down to eat, and it wasn't long before my dad's voice broke the silence. "So, Claire, how's the art thing going?" he asked, not even looking up from his plate. "Still painting?" I couldn't help the slight bitterness in my voice. "Yes, Dad. Still painting." Andrew glanced at me, a raised eyebrow betraying his disinterest. He picked at his salad, obviously waiting for the conversation to move on. I didn't expect my father to be impressed by my career, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. My dad, in his typical fashion, didn't just leave it at a question. He had to throw in one of his typical digs. "You know, Claire, I still don't get why you're throwing away all this time on something that's never going to pay the bills." He paused for effect, his eyes briefly meeting mine before moving back to his meal. "You're never going to make it as an artist. You're just wasting your life." I felt a wave of anger rise in me, but I held it back. I had heard it all before. Andrew, however, chimed in with his usual brand of insensitivity. "You know, Claire, I hate to say it, but Dad's right. At some point, you have to face facts. Art doesn't pay the bills. You should just go back to school and get something practical under your belt. You know, like the rest of us." I felt my cheeks flush with frustration. There it was. The judgment I had grown up with. The dismissal of everything I had worked so hard for. Andrew, in his neat little world of numbers and corporate success, couldn't understand why someone would choose a different path. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Actually, I've been doing just fine, Andrew," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not interested in going back to school. I'm building my career on my terms." Andrew didn't respond. He didn't need to. He already had his mind made up. To him, I was just the artist who would never amount to anything. I turned my attention to my dad. "You know, I actually have some news," I said, surprising both of them. "I've been offered a private commission by Peter, the CEO of Andrew's company. He wants me to paint a piece for his office." My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, there was silence. Andrew, for once, looked genuinely surprised. He exchanged a glance with my dad, but neither of them said anything for a few seconds. Then, my dad spoke, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Peter?" he asked. "Are you sure he wasn't just being polite? CEOs don't go around commissioning artwork from people like you, Claire." I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let it show. "I'm sure, Dad. He's been very clear about it. He's interested in my work." Andrew, always eager to show his superiority, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Well, that's nice, Claire. But let's see if it actually turns into anything. CEOs are busy people. They probably forget about things like that." I felt a sharp pang of anger in my chest. My family was treating this like it was a fluke, like it didn't matter. But it did matter. This was an opportunity, and they couldn't see it. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it was the validation I had been waiting for. It was proof that I wasn't wasting my life. But I didn't say anything. I just stared at my plate, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't need their approval anymore. I was getting along fine without it. The conversation quickly shifted to Andrew's upcoming business trip, and I found myself tuning it out, my thoughts lingering on Peter's offer. Could it really turn into something more? Was I actually on the verge of making something of myself, or was this just another dream that would fade away the moment I stopped paying attention? After dinner, I made my excuses and left the house early. I didn't want to sit through any more judgment or condescending comments. I didn't need to explain myself to them. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about Peter. He wasn't like the others. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't look at my art with pity or confusion. He understood it. And that made all the difference. It wasn't just the commission itself that was exciting, it was the idea that someone in my life, someone with real power, believed in me. I just had to hold on to that belief, no matter what anyone else thought. The days that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and doubt. The email exchanges with Peter grew more frequent as we discussed the specifics of the commission. He wanted something that could symbolize both strength and creativity, a piece that spoke to the kind of leadership he valued at his company. It was exactly the kind of challenge I had been waiting for, one that pushed me out of my comfort zone, but also one I felt capable of conquering. But as the project started taking shape, so did the tension between me and my family. My dad, despite his initial skepticism, could sense that something was changing in me. He still didn't understand why I couldn't just get a real job, but he was beginning to see that I was no longer the person he could control. He tried, of course. His conversations with me became more frequent, with comments about how art was still a hobby and not a career. But I didn't bite. I no longer felt the need to defend myself. I wasn't going to bend to their expectations anymore. Andrew, on the other hand, wasn't as subtle. He didn't hide his disdain for my career choices, but the more I worked with Peter, the more his smugness started to irritate me. He couldn't fathom how anyone could be interested in my art, especially someone like Peter, who was a successful CEO. To Andrew, it wasn't real. It was just some fleeting interest that would fizzle out in the end. One Saturday afternoon, after another call with Peter about the commission, I received a message from Andrew. It was simple enough, Claire, you're not getting any younger. If you want to make this art thing work, you need to start taking it seriously. The words were condescending, the way he always spoke to me. I took a breath, then decided it was time to respond, but not in the way he expected. I picked up my phone and typed a response. Funny you say that, Andrew. I guess taking things seriously means getting a CEO of a major company to personally commission your work, something I'm sure you've never done. Have a nice weekend. I hit send and set my phone down, a sense of satisfaction bubbling up inside me. It wasn't just the message, it was the feeling that I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I had carved my own path, and I was no longer interested in their approval. A week later, I finished the painting I had been working on for Peter. It was everything I had hoped it would be. Strong, bold, yet fluid in its execution, with colors that symbolized both power and innovation. I emailed Peter the final image and waited, trying to calm my nerves. His response came almost immediately. This is exactly what I envisioned, Claire. It's perfect. I'll have it delivered to my office next week, and I want to feature it prominently in the lobby. I'm also planning to host an event soon where I'd love for you to present the piece. I'll make sure you're introduced to the right people. It was more than I could have dreamed of. Not only had Peter embraced my work, but now I was going to be introduced to a network of influential people who could actually make a difference. Then came the real twist. A few days later, while I was out picking up supplies for my next project, I received a call from my dad. His voice was tight, his words clipped. Claire, you need to come over. Now. I didn't hesitate. I drove to their house, wondering what kind of drama I was walking into this time. When I arrived, Andrew was sitting in the living room, his usual smug expression replaced with one of discomfort. Benjamin was pacing, clearly upset. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, despite the tension in the air. My father didn't waste any time. I've just seen something online, Claire. Your art, or rather, that piece you did for Peter, was featured in an article on his company's website. They're promoting you as a visionary artist now. What is this? I raised an eyebrow, feeling a smirk tug at the corner of my lips. That's right, Dad. Peter liked it so much, he's featuring it in his company's lobby. It's getting attention. Maybe you should check it out. My father froze. The idea of one of his corporate connections championing my work clearly hit him harder than I anticipated. Andrew, ever the opportunist, spoke up, trying to mask his surprise. So, you're actually making money off this? Andrew asked, his voice betraying a hint of disbelief. I leaned back, letting the silence hang for a moment before I answered. Yes, Andrew. Turns out people can make money and find success in art, too. Not everything has to be about spreadsheets and stock options. I could see the frustration bubbling beneath Andrew's calm exterior. He wasn't used to me standing my ground. And my father, well, he didn't know how to react. For a moment, he just stared at me. There was no smug remark, no dismissal of my achievements. He was speechless. I decided to keep the momentum going. I'm actually meeting Peter next week at a charity event where he's showcasing my work. I'll be introduced to several important people. It looks like the career you've always wanted me to have is finally coming together, just not the way you envisioned it. My father's face reddened slightly. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't something he could dismiss or belittle. His daughter, the one he had written off as a failure, was not only succeeding but doing so in a way that defied everything he thought he knew about success. Andrew sat quietly, his mouth tight. He had no retort. For all his professional success, it felt like he had been eclipsed by someone who had always been considered unfocused by the family. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, my father spoke, his voice lower now, tinged with something that might have been regret. I never thought you could do it, Claire. I thought you were just wasting your time. But I guess I was wrong. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to say anything. There was no need to rub it in any further. The truth was out there. My art had found its place. Peter's belief in me had validated everything I had fought for. And that validation was more powerful than any approval I had ever sought from my father. Andrew stood up to leave, muttering something about work. Before he left, though, he turned to me with a reluctant but sincere look. Maybe I've been wrong about you, Claire. Maybe this art thing isn't such a joke after all. I nodded, not bothering to say anything in return. I didn't need his approval. I had something better. When I left that house that night, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. I wasn't just a freeloading artist anymore. I was someone who had built her success on her own terms, someone who had taken a chance on herself when no one else would. And as for my dad and Andrew? Well, they didn't need to understand. Not anymore. My success wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about proving to myself that I had value. I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, on my own terms, with or without their approval.